Hello there, Wrestless fans. Welcome back to another edition of Ringside Chats. Today, we have a very special guest, our very first guest, who is not based in Texas. We're talking to the one, the only, the Hawaiian warrior, Kekoa. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I know we were talking about this off air, but I'm appreciative that that you asked me, especially being the first. There's a gazillion independent wrestlers out there that are outside of Texas, so I appreciate you extending the hand and asking me to come on. So thank you very much.
Of course, as many people would know you, like how I found you, you have started to amass quite a following on social media because of your work as the head trainer of House of Champions. You've blown up on TikTok, you're blowing up more and more on Instagram because of the way you like to train your students. You like to play some games with them, you like to do a little trivia, a little bit of wrestling history with them.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the idea of doing that, and not only doing that but deciding to record it and put it out on social media?
Well, the first idea was, or essentially just like the first thought process was, okay, you know, House of Champions is our school. Okay, it's a brand new school. It's based out of Florida, the Orlando area. We're in Longwood, Florida specifically. And my first thought process was, okay, well, we need to elevate ourselves on social media because that's how everyone finds everybody nowadays. And especially too, looking at it from an outside perspective, if I was, a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid again, and I was researching which school I want to go to, of course, um, you have these types of people that are always going to recommend one school over another, and with certain guidance, so on and so forth. But um, I feel like the way that I'm approaching training right now is a very nice blend of new school and old school, things that we need to hold on to, but other things we need to let die in the past. And again, adapt and evolve, because otherwise you're not going to make it in this business. So it was, how can we show that, like, we're just a different school, we have a different environment, we have a different atmosphere, we're very supportive of each other, we're uplifting, we're not trying to have this toxicity inside of our school. And I wanted to have some fun, I wanted to learn, and I'm like, okay, well, how can we do that? And the thing that I always joke about is, obviously, I'm a little bit older than all of my students, of course, and that's how it's going to be. And a lot of my students are very young in the game. I think the average age is about 21, 22, but our youngest student is 15 years old. So when we look at these age gaps between myself and where they are, and then you look at, okay, well, who did they grow up watching? And then who did I grow up watching? And then, oh, do you really know about this person or that person? And then I started realizing the amount of generational gap there was in knowledge, and it's always going to be that way, where but I was like, all right, well, let's have some fun with this. And then, again, I pay attention to social media, and I knew that if we did a little bit of history lesson, we made some fun out of it, and then we recorded it. And I'm like, the 35, 40, 45 year olds on TikTok are going to have a field day with this. They are going to be so incredibly angry. And I said, but the people that are so incredibly angry are the ones that are going to comment, because they have to express how angry they are. And then when the comments get jacked up, then the views get jacked up. TikTok presses those videos that are getting a lot of engagement, and then all of a sudden it shows up on a lot more For You pages. And yeah, like they took off like out of nowhere, and it was exactly what I was hoping for, and the engagement was exactly what I was hoping for. So I was really excited about it, and I'm glad that it's working, and I'm glad that I'm hitting on all of these different parameters. We're getting our social media up on not only mine, but the schools, so that we can push everybody to that, essentially, and then do their research if they're looking for a school, and again, and learn at the same time.
Definitely. It's been such a cool journey to see, like, the school and yourself rise up in popularity. And you talk about that generational gap that sometimes you and your students have. What would you
Don't mind
say?
me.
Yeah, don't worry. Keep keep doing your thing. Um what would you say is some things that you had to switch up in training from when you were beginning in wrestling and getting trained? Because you said you had to make some adjustments. What are some things that you had to take out and apply to these students? What are some things that you had to add?
I don't even necessarily want to say that I took a lot of things away. So for me, you know, and my upbringing, there was a lot of rules that were set that were like these unwritten rules. There's this rule book of amongst professional wrestlers, and when I came into the business, I just said yes, sir, and I took these lessons, and then I kind of continued on. And then when the way like people would explain it to me, I go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I think what happens with most coaches or most veterans and, really anybody, even outside of the wrestling world, when you have a viewpoint and it's your viewpoint, I feel like people are always going to push you towards like, hey, this is what's right. This is what's wrong. And that's it at the end of the day. I'm very transparent with my students. I'm very transparent with anybody that I ask because I say, hey, my way is not going to work for everybody. I know that there's other, as we always call it, flavors of ice cream, where this might be your style or this might be your style, so on and so forth. Like, just look at AEW compared to WWE, two completely different styles of wrestling, two completely different styles of shows. So I have my flavor, but I also say like, hey, there are other flavors out there. This is why I like my flavor, but I understand why there are many flavors. So to go back to these rules and how they were pushed on me, and it was their way or the highway, these types of things. So I still remember like one of the first rules was, don't date anybody in the business. And for anybody that's a wrestling fan now, you can see that rule has been long gone. I feel like if you are a wrestler, you're probably dating a wrestler, because it takes a special type of person to date a professional wrestler, because we're dream chasers and there's long nights and long days and a lot of traveling and so on and so forth. So some people just don't understand, and that's perfectly fine. But that's why we tend to lean towards wrestlers. Hence why I married a wrestler. It was a very easy decision for me. But at the time when it was explained to me, it was like, well, don't date a wrestler because there's going to be too much drama within the relationship. Like if your significant other gets an opportunity over you, it could cause friction inside the home and this and that and yada, yada, yada. And as I'm listening, I'm like, yeah, you're right. It could cause friction, but it's not until, I get into serious relationships and then I also meet my wife and I'm like, well, if she got a shot at WWE or AEW, wherever she wanted to go, why would I be mad about that? Like, that's my wife, that's my significant other. Like, you're supposed to support the person that you love. Like, there's no jealousy, like that's not true love then, if there is that animosity in between the two. So that's like one of the things. So again, not really adding things, but like letting things die. We already know so much more about CTE, concussions than we knew back then. So I think, that's not just a me thing. I think that's an across the board, like, hey, I don't think we need to take chair shots straight to the head anymore. That was part of like my initiation. And like my very first match, my trainer hit me over the head with a chair. And when we were in the back, talking about it, and he said, yeah, we're going to do this at this point of the match. Am I allowed to curse on here, or do I gotta watch? I gotta be careful.
No
myself.
need to censor. Go ahead.
I'm normally a sailor, so that's also why I asked. So when I get when I get hyped up about some of these stories, like it takes over because that's my true self. But we're in the back and we're talking about it. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna hit you over the head with a chair at this point. Don't you fucking put your hands up? And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna. And I took it. I don't do that. I don't do we don't do that anymore as the wrestling business. Then one other thing off the top of my head is, and this was a lot of things that was happening on the TikTok comments. A lot of, either somebody that might have had a little bit of experience in the business, or they're just aware of these things. But the older generation, again, they're like, if they don't know who these guys are, they should get chopped every single time, or they should take 5 chops for everything. I'm like, we don't do that here. Like, beating the shit out of somebody for no reason because they weren't exposed to somebody, like, that's not fair to them. Like, they don't know. It's not fair to them.
Yeah, not everyone's a wrestling historian. They don't deserve to get beat up because of that.
No, and the way that I've talked about this with other people, when we've been conversating about it, to put it in another way, and this is too much wordage to put into a comment on TikTok, so I had to word it differently so that people can understand. But so, I'm now 36 years old. I just turned 36 last week. My first memory of WWE, my first memory of wrestling is the 1993 Royal Rumble. Don't know why that is, because I was watching wrestling from the time I was 3, but I was 6 years old at the time of the 93 Rumble. So that's my first memory. Okay. So now the 93 Royal Rumble, we're talking Macho, Yoko, we're talking Perfect, Flair, the legends, as we are calling them now today. So now let me put it to you in the perspective of this way. Again, my youngest student was born in 2007.
Wow.
So if he was 6 years old, we're talking 2013.
Yeah.
Could be his first memory of the wrestling business, or even let's go to the little bit older of the older side of my students. So if someone was born in the year 2000, their first memory is 2006. That's John Cena. That's CM Punk. That's people that are still active.
Yeah.
But 20 something years later, almost, like, people don't think about like the time frame, like time, it just gets lost when we get older of like, man, like that was so long ago. Well, not to them. Like that was their upbringing. It's crazy to think about, but when you put it in that manner, you really go like, wow, like no wonder why they don't know who, Brutus Beefcake is, or who Adrian Adonis is. And that's another way when I was telling people, through TikTok, how do they not know who Adrian Adonis is? He's a legend. Well, he died in 1988. My youngest student was born in 2007. Why do you think he doesn't know who Adrian Adonis is? That was almost 40 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
dear Lord. But people don't like think of the bigger picture in those manners.
Definitely, I think when people talk wrestling, obviously there's a lot of biases involved for what you grew up with. Like for me, we just did an episode on ruthless aggression, and that's the era I grew up with. I'm born in '99, and all I remember is John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista and stuff like that. So obviously, I feel very strongly towards that. So when people ask, like, "Who's the greatest of all time?" Like, "Oh, it's Triple H," and like, but then you go back in the day, you ask someone like yourself who grew up in that golden era of wrestling and attitude era, new generation, from that time period, you probably have a very different answer, right?
Yeah,
Um,
everyone's gonna have a different answer. Um, and I've also said this, and I didn't mean to interrupt you by any means, but the another way that I put it too, because a lot of people were commenting on the videos and saying, well, if they don't know their history, they shouldn't get into the business. And then I always put it to like, so you're saying that someone that wants to be a doctor should know every single medication before they get into medical school? Like, that's what school is for. That's what also guidance is for, to be like, hey, you should watch this person because they were really good at this or that. When I started in 2006, like, I couldn't tell you one person from WCW outside of Sting and the Giant, and Goldberg, like the main stars of that. Like, you asked me,
right.
I honestly, like, if you would have asked me who Dean Malenko was at the time, I can't remember if I knew who Dean Malenko was at the time. Like, you know, I was very much a WWF guy growing up, and I knew of the war, and I was like, nope, I'm WWF. I'm not even turning that on. So there's a whole other side of history that I didn't know until I got into the business, and then I was like, oh man, I should probably brush up on that now, because now wrestling is whole in my. I'm not a kid anymore.
Yeah.
I'm part of this, so now I need to learn more. And to the credit of my students, especially for those that have seen the videos, everyone always remembers the beginning and the end. Well, my first student, Pat, is always the first one in those videos because we shot so many, so that's why it was spread out into so many parts. So he's just getting torn apart in every single bit. Like, they're like, this guy doesn't know one. He hasn't gotten any. I was like, well, he got the Heart Foundation. I was like, and I forget what the other ones he got that were like the older generation, but man, he's been hitting the books since then. So, like, props to him. He took it as in the right way that he should, which then again, you go back to those comments and they're like, they don't deserve to be in the business because they don't respect the business. I go, but they do, because they realized and acknowledged that there's so much to learn from, and they went, I'm going to go back and learn all that stuff. So they're doing great. Just people have to be more open-minded and a little bit more laid back. It's not that serious all the time.
Definitely. I love that approach to wrestling. How do your students feel about the videos and the questions and the games you guys have been producing?
They, I mean, if you can't tell, they have a lot of fun with it. Um, when I Before we even filmed one of those, I warned them. I said, y'all are gonna get torn apart. I said, but it's for the greater good. And I was like, also, side note, like, you have to have such thick skin in this business, because you could literally be the nicest person in the world. At some point, you're going to make a mistake, and you're not even going to realize it, and you're going to upset someone, and then you just have to be apologetic, or you just go like, hey, I'm really sorry. Doesn't matter. It's just everyone's going to have a different perspective of situations. So I had to try to give them the best warning that I can. Not one of my students ever came to me and said, you know what, I don't want to be in those videos anymore because I can't handle the animosity that we're getting, or whatever the case is. I warned them, they saw it, but then, again, as the parts go on, if there is somebody like such as Pat, that first kid, I knew he was going to get more when we got to the later guys, because that's his generation. And then we uploaded a part of like, hey, here's some signed talent, whether to WWE or AEW, what were their independent names. He knew all that. He killed that part.
He
And
did.
then everyone was commenting that, like, oh, first guy, like, he finally came around. I'm like, I told you to wait. Like, just give it time. Like, of course he got those. That's his era. That's his time.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that video. He killed it. And I think it's so cool for students to not only be able to start progressing on living out their dreams of being a wrestler, right? Because it's a slim chance of being at the very top of it, but everyone who puts in the hard work knows that, and they're still striving for it. So it's a really cool thing in general. But you're allowing them also to have so much fun while doing it too. I think that's a really cool process you guys are doing at House of Champions down in Florida. I want to kind of take it back to your first interactions with wrestling. As you said, your first memory was Royal Rumble. You said the
93, yeah.
93. Yes. Was wrestling a common thing in your household?
Only because I watched it. It wasn't, my mom didn't watch it, my dad didn't watch
Okay.
it.
Okay.
My sister didn't watch it. It was just me. So
Just
when
you.
you say it was common, I'm like, it was common in my room, nowhere else in the household.
Yeah. But you said you got into it when you've been watching since you're 3 years old, correct? Who was
Yeah, from what I was told, my mom said that my dad put me in front of the TV, and as a parent now, I can understand. I have two girls. I have a 2-year-old and I have a almost 9-month-old. And
wow.
when they start getting a little bit older, you just like flip the channels and you just try to figure out what's going to stick. The amount of videos that we've gone through on YouTube, Netflix, Disney, all of these different things of like, I don't know what you're going to watch, but we'll figure it out. So wrestling was what like caught my attention. The same way like I still know that the very first time that my first daughter like connected to the TV and stopped in her tracks and went, "What is this? I'm watching this." Was Monsters Inc. You know what I mean? Like it's just that was it. So I think that's how it essentially happened. Because again, yeah, my parents weren't wrestling fans, so I think it was destiny, if anything.
Nice. That's interesting. What do you felt drew to you about wrestling? What was so appealing to of it?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know, because by the time my first memory of watching wrestling, like I was already deep into it, of like, oh yeah, I love this. Like this is so much fun to watch, and just cheering everybody on. And I loved, growing up. One of my best friends, his name is Matt. We're still friends to this day. So we've known each other since we were like 5 years old. We used to like go over to each other's houses, and it would be like his parents would get the pay-per-view one month, and then my parents would get it, or like we would trade, let me borrow your action figures because I don't have that guy, but you can borrow this one. I have this one. So like it was just overall just like all of it was fun. But I don't remember like what drew me to wrestling because, like I said, by the time I had my first memory, I was already deep into it. It was like, yeah, this is what I do now.
Yeah. And what could you tell me about growing up with the Attitude Era? Like arguably one of the hottest eras in wrestling of all time. It felt like everyone was watching wrestling at this point. You were a
Mm-hmm.
WWF guy, you didn't watch WCW.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about the Attitude Era?
I remember getting in trouble a lot because I was doing and saying a lot of things that I wasn't old enough to say, and I didn't know what I was saying. Like I vividly remember being in like the fourth or fifth grade and being in gym class, and I still remember like I think we were playing like dodgeball or something of that sort, and I remember I was yelling to this other kid about something like "Give me that ball" or whatever, or this or that, and I remember being mad at him, and I just suck it sign, and my gym teacher saw it, but oh wait, hang on, no, I take it back. So I did this one right. So my young self thought this was like break it down, and this meant suck it. Like if you did it with or without the cross. That's how my mind worked at that time.
Okay.
Uh, Mind you, I was in fourth grade. I was 10, so I
Yeah.
don't know. But I did it, and my gym teacher saw me, and she's like, "Go sit down. Like you're in trouble." I was like, "What'd I do?" And then she informed my teacher why I got in trouble, and then I couldn't do recess, and then my parents had to get called, and I was like, she doesn't know what it means,
Yeah.
but somehow she did, so she must be a wrestling fan. but um, but yeah, I vividly remember getting in trouble a lot. I vividly remember just like how hot wrestling was. Um, and it goes back to like the Andy Bernard saying. I always quote The Office and all these other shows that I love, but it's one of those like you don't know that you're in the good old days until you've actually left them. So you look back at like man, like the cards for like normal house shows, and I remember watching like Bret Hart with British Bulldog versus and Shawn Michaels versus Yoko and Taker and Bigelow, and I'm like, oh my god, like what a card! Like
Yeah.
it's just insane. It's just insane to think about now.
It really is. Could you tell me? Obviously, I grew up after the Attitude Era, and the more traditional fans would always tell us about the lunchroom debates, WCW, WWF. Is that true? Would that happen to you?
So my debates, from what I remember, I do remember like some people were like WCW is pretty cool, and I'm like, no, it's not. I don't remember heated debates about WCW versus WWF, but I do remember once I got into like middle school. So like this is like 2001, 2002. This was when TNA was like on the up, Ring of Honor's on the up, and then my buddies were like, "Oh no, I like this independent stuff, and I like this other stuff because like it's not mainstream and it's so cool." And I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "Well, I still really love WWF. Like those are my colors. That's what I bleed." And then they would show me all of these, videos of like AJ Styles, Daniels, Joe. All these impact videos, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty insane. I'm like, but I never tuned in because I was such a diehard. Like I didn't, I felt like I was cheating on WWE if I watched any type of TNA or any other type of wrestling. But those were the debates. Like my buddies tried to be like so cool of like naming all these other wrestlers. Like you don't know, and I'm like, and now looking back, I'm like, yeah, you were right. Like maybe I should have paid attention to everybody else a little bit more, but I'm a kid. What do I know?
Exactly. What do we know, right?
Nothing.
And could you tell me about the first, like, obviously you grew up a fan, you've been watching the product, you're the WWF guy, but when do you decide that this is what I'm gonna do? This is gonna be my life. I'm gonna be a professional wrestler.
So I said it for years, but then when I got to like middle school and like early high school, um, I don't know if it was my parents or I don't know if it was just like other people influencing my life, but I think they were just trying to push me more towards like a realistic career. And so people were, I know that my family was like, well, you're going to go to college because that was the thing that we were all forced to do when you're my age at that time. Um, and then also I played a lot of sports. Like I played baseball, I played basketball. So then it was like, well, maybe that's what's going to take over. Like maybe that's going to be the thing if it continues. But it really didn't. But it wasn't until I met a gentleman by the name of Bud Carson. So Bud had a pro wrestling memorabilia store in Allentown, Pennsylvania, on 13th and Linden. Still remember. And at the time, in the back of his shop, the Wild Samoans used to train out of there. And so he was like, hey, do you want to go? Do you want to go look at the ring? And I was like, fuck yeah. Like, of course I want to go look at the ring. And I got to the back. I remember him flickering on the lights and seeing the ring like all by itself. And I thought it was like the coolest thing that I've ever seen in my life. And I walked up and he was like, do you want to get in? And I was like, absolutely. And I walk up the stairs, I get in the ring, and it was so weird. I've talked about this in other interviews, and I've told this story many times, but I can't explain it. But when I was inside the ring and when I touched the rope, I don't know what happened, but when I touched the rope, it was as if like my mind just clicked, and it was like, nope, I'm done. Like that's it. I don't know what it was. It was like a fucking surge that went through me of some type of feeling. Something in my gut was like, nope, like it's time now. Like that's enough. Like you've made up your mind, and I never looked back since then.
So it's crazy. That's where the Wild Samoans trained.
At the time, yeah, and then essentially how my training started was the Samoans were no longer training there.
Okay.
They took their ring and they left, and Bud, essentially, I'm assuming losing that income as like renting out the space to the Samoans was like, well, crap, like, I'm losing that part of my income. So he's like, I'm going to start my own wrestling school. And since he had already knew me and he knew that it was what I wanted to do, and I had a lot of athletic ability because, I played all these different sports, he came to me and was like, I'm starting a wrestling school and I want you to be part of the first class. And it's actually a funny story because, that was during my senior year of high school, and I was getting ready to graduate, and my dad wanted to take me and my high school sweetheart on like a trip as like a, hey, like, congratulations, you graduated high school. So he wanted to do like maybe like a cruise or something. My girlfriend didn't like cruises, so he was like, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you $500. He goes, just book your own trip. I was like, all right, yeah, that works. So her and I were planning to go to Daytona Beach. I remember we looked at hotels, we were planning the flights and everything like that. And then that was around the time that Bud, was like, hey, I want you to start at my wrestling school. And I was like, well, I don't have a lot of money to do this. And I know that it's very expensive. And he goes, well, how much money do you got? And I'm like, I have $500. And he went, all right, we'll use that as your down payment, and then you can pay me monthly. And I said, I bet. And I went home and I called my girl and I was like, baby, we're not going on anything. We're not going on vacation. And I told her where I just spent the money, and she went, no, I understand. Like, it's what you've always wanted to do. Yeah, she understood.
That's great.
And then my I don't know what the word is, ignorant, young, selfish self then dumped her soon after that, even after she supported me, because I was half like, man, I don't think it's fair to you that I'm going to be going to college and wrestling. I'm like, I just don't foresee time, and it's not fair to you to just be like waiting around for me because I'm going to be so busy. But obviously learning way later as a little bit more mature adult and not an 18-year-old, like you can always make time for, the people that you love, but that was already long gone. I already screwed that up. So, but that's how I essentially got into the wrestling business, taking vacation money. And I said, all right, let's go.
What was your parents' reaction to you not only deciding to go to wrestling, but to spending that money they gave you to go to wrestling?
My dad, I'm not really close with my dad. So when like my dad had already given me the money at the time. So, and he's very laid back. Like he doesn't care about a lot of things, which is why I don't think we're as close as I would like to be. But so when I told him like, hey, I'm signing up for wrestling school, it was like, oh, cool. And it's just like the conversation continued, but it wasn't like a supportive, like he didn't care. Like he didn't care that I was doing it. It was like, oh, cool, I'm just talking to you type thing. When I told my mom, she told me that, she wasn't supportive whatsoever. I know this now that she was being a protective mother, and that's why she wasn't supportive. But in the conversations that I've had with my mom since then, because I've done these interviews before and I've answered this question before, and she's like, "Why do you tell people that?" And I said, "Because that's what happened." She literally looked me in the eye and said, "You are going to waste your life if you do this." And I said, "Well, screw that. I'm gonna fucking do it anyway." And she's like, and then we have these conversations like, well, like, why do you tell people that? I said, because that's my story, because that's what happened. And I also want other people to know that even if you have parents that maybe are being overprotective like mine was, or non-supportive like mine was, that it doesn't fucking matter. It's your dream. Like, if it's your dream, like, go do it. It doesn't matter. And obviously, since then, and my mom realized like I can take care of myself, and wrestling was going fine, then she's very supportive now. She loves coming to my shows.
Awesome.
It was just a reactionary thing. When I'm younger, and I'm about to also leave the house. So as a parent now, I get it, but at the time it was like, oof. Now I'm gonna fucking prove you. Now I'm gonna prove you wrong.
Yeah, doubt can be a hell of a motivator
Mm-hmm.
to succeed. And you start training here, and you said it was in Pennsylvania, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about, like, lead me through. You started training to the moment where you're like, hey, you take this chair shot, don't put your hands up.
So training was very, very hard. Something that my trainers very much instilled into me, and told me, they're like, when you get done with this training, with how we train you, you are going to be able to out wrestle anybody on the independents right now. Uh, specifically with cardio alone, because they're like, nobody on the independent scene is taking care of themselves. They're all fat and out of shape, and they're like, you guys are going to be in such good shape. And to their credit, they were right, because we were training during the summer, and in that room it would get to be like 100 degrees because there was no windows. There was an AC unit in that room, and my trainer would literally at the start of every practice would turn it off, and he's like, we don't need this. And we would train
What?
in a 100-degree room, and then on top of it, once like we're doing all of these cardio drills and running around and crawling, jumping, getting slammed, all this stuff, like our body temperatures were obviously raising the temperature of the room, so it had to be 105, 110 degrees, at least. um, so yeah, like that's what I trained in to get ready for everything. And it was very tough. And now to fast forward to now with House of Champions, like we're in Florida. Florida's summers are, as you know, you're in Texas, like they're not easy. And
No, sir.
it may be even a little bit harder because we have the humidity. It's not just dry, hot. It's very hard to breathe in this type of humidity. I leave those doors, open or closed depending on the day. I turn off the fans that we have. We do have air conditioning in the building, but I don't turn that on. I'm like, it's 105 degrees. I'm like, all right, we're gonna blow ourselves up today, because if you can last in these drills in this building, it's gonna be a cakewalk when you wrestle in any other building that has air conditioning, because you're used to the absolute worst conditions.
Absolutely. I don't know if you heard about, in Texas we have a couple promotions, Reality of Wrestling, you know, New Texas Pro Wrestling, and they train in some heat, man. They turn it up. Houston Premier Arena down here, it's one of the hottest arenas to train in at Premier Wrestling Federation. They train in pure hell. For
And
short,
that's good.
for the lack of term. Yeah, it's good. The cardio over there is insane. I was gonna ask you, what techniques did you were you taught that you bring over to training these kids, other than obviously like making them drench in that heat?
So a lot of what I was taught was how to wrestle. Like wrestling was really instilled in me, from my trainer. To my trainer's discredit, again, I'm very fortunate with the trainer that I had and how I was trained in this and that. But there was a whole other aspect of wrestling that I wasn't taught, and that's the entertainment side of wrestling.
Mm.
And
Right.
again, it was one of those like, he didn't teach me the other flavors of ice cream that are out there that are also acceptable. Like, I wasn't given the full spectrum. And it's hard for a trainer to show you absolutely everything, to prepare you for everything. Like, that's why you have to work the independence, and you have to travel, and you have to go to different regions and territories and overseas, so that you learn all these different styles, and working with different people. I understand all of that. A trainer can't show you absolutely everything, but there was this whole other entertainment side that I wasn't shown, and I was only shown how to wrestle and how to do wrestling psychology, but also, like, we're forgetting about this whole other side of the entertainment aspect. Um,
Yeah.
so I do bring that over, because the fundamentals are absolutely everything. If you talk to anybody, you know, um, that either works within WWE or within AEW, so on and so forth, anybody that has that respectable opinion, they're going to tell you right away, like, if you can't do a lockup right, or if you don't know how to do rolls right, or how to do the basic fundamentals right, like, you're not going to be able to do anything else right. They're going to turn if you, especially if you send in a resume, or you have them watch your match to try to get booked or somewhere, like, they're going to turn it off right away, because you're going to lose them from the get-go. So I
Right.
do very much focus on fundamentals, and making sure those things are so crisp that they're not going to turn off. They're not going to swipe or turn off. The match within the
Hmm.
first 30 seconds. Like, you're going to hook them from the beginning and go like, oh, who's this guy, and then watch, the rest of your match. So that's
Right.
definitely, cardio is number one, fundamentals is number two, because you have to have the cardio in order to do the fundamentals. If you can do the fundamentals, but you get blown up, we're back to square one. So you have to have cardio, you have to have the fundamentals, and you have to learn to be able to protect yourself. So that's essentially like my mindset of how, I'm carrying on what I was taught.
Hmm. And now that you're a head trainer, how would you now critique your year one of wrestling? What would you have to say about Kekoa year one?
So the biggest thing, and I've taught, and I tell my students this all the time, because uh, now that they're going through, training, and they're thinking about their future. I wish that someone, again, like, took me and spoke with me, and told me to focus more on character. I didn't have a character. I called myself Kekoa the Flying Hawaiian, because I used to be able to dunk, in high school. Like, I used to be able to jump very, very high. Um, so people, like, when I would jump in the air, because I'm only like 5'11", 6 foot. So, like, when I would jump in the air, it would look like I'm floating, because I'm not that tall. Um, compared to basketball players.
Right.
Um, so I just ran with it, because I had nothing else. Um, and I did that for like 9 years. I was Kekoa the Flying Line for 9 years, and it wasn't until I did like a Ring of Honor tryout that essentially every coach from Ring of Honor was telling me, like, we need more out of you. Like it's just very basic. Like, there's not enough there. And I didn't,
Mhm.
and that was the first time in 9 years that anyone ever said that to me. And it
Wow.
was like, where the hell was this advice this entire time? And I was so frustrated with it. And then it just so happened at the time that I tore my ACL. So I really took it upon myself to go like, okay, I'm just going to completely reinvent myself. And then, like, that's
Mhm.
what I focused on, was character, and then the backstory, and you know um, the backstory to then be able to bleed into more promos, and be able to talk about all these other things, and not just go, this Saturday I'm going to overcome, and I'm going to beat you, and yada yada, basic, 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 basic. So if I were able to go back, I'd be like, you can enjoy Kekoa the Flying Hawaiian for now, maybe the first year or two, but you have to figure something else out in the meantime. You have to have more character. You have to have just something. Um, yeah, I really wish I could have done that, and I tell these kids that now, like, I'm saving you 9 years worth of advice.
Right.
So yeah, it's very important.
And when you're traveling all across the states, wrestling as the Flying Hawaiian, what are some of the critiques they're giving you?
Um, the a lot of the critique was always, like, I could do less. I could do less. Like, I always wanted to try to. like, oh, I can do this move and I can do that move and I can do this and I can do that. So it wasn't like I was doing like incredibly too much. It's not like they gave me, 10 minutes of a time and I went 20 by any means, but
Yeah.
I think there just needed to be more, again, entertainment focused, like acknowledge the crowd, talk to them a little bit more. But again, to my discredit, I don't remember getting a lot of really good critiques from the people that I wish I could have gotten it from, because I felt like, I don't know, like, I just remember a lot of people always like patting me on the back and being like, yeah, you did really good. I would change this one thing and that's about it. And then forget about all these other things that I could have been working on. And that's
Yeah.
another thing too. Like, there's too many people within this business that are like, they don't want to upset somebody else by telling them like, hey, your match was shit. Like, hey, like that was terrible. And I've been on shows where like I'm watching somebody else, and in my opinion, they had a terrible match. And then they come through the curtain, and then these two guys are hugging each other like they just tore it down at WrestleMania. And I'm like, huh. And then I fall under that same category. I'm like, well, I don't want to bring them down. And like, they're so happy about like, and they're so proud of themselves for what they did. I don't know their backstory. And I also don't know what their future is. Like, I don't know if their plan is to get signed. I don't know if their plan is just to, be a local independent wrestler, because if that's their goal, then okay, then they did well for that. I really then started focusing. I'm like, I'm really only going to give my opinion if somebody asks for it. If you don't ask for it, I'm not going to be that guy to go to you and be like, you were terrible, or like, you need to work on this, or yada, yada, yada. So, again, it's kind of like you pick your poison, because I wish I would have had the same thing. I wish somebody would have came to me and been like, this was terrible, but not everyone thinks the way that I do. Not everyone learns the same way that I do. Some people need a lot more encouragement and go like, hey, next time maybe we do this. And then there's me that, I don't know, maybe I'm dismantled in the head, or where I just need to get yelled at, and then I go, oh, okay, I'm gonna fix that. I don't want to get yelled at again.
Yeah. And on the East Coast, all the states are very, unlike Texas, all the states are very tightly close together, so you can travel quite easily. When you wrestle in Texas, you pretty much just wrestle in Texas. But did you ever? I believe I saw this somewhere. Did you wrestle for a promotion in Virginia called VCW?
I did multiple times.
By any chance, did you run across a wrestler named Blake Broadway, now going by JJ Blake? By any chance?
Um, Probably.
Yeah.
I'm gonna admit this. I have a god awful memory, and also too, like, if I haven't seen him in years, but I see his face, I'm like, oh yeah, I absolutely know who that is. Like, I'm god awful with names and faces. It's like my kryptonite. I
Yeah.
fucking hate it so much,
Yeah.
because it's literally gotten to the point where like I've seen, and I'm like, we've done so many shows together, and I'm
Right.
like, I know you look familiar. I'm like, I don't have it. I'm so sorry. Like, I wish I had that. Or I tell other people that can remember stories and moments and all of these things, like dating years back. I'm like, I wish I had that memory. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's just because my brain's not wired that way, or I've been hit in the head too many times. Probably both, but I don't have it. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I don't know this person, but I'm also
Sure.
saying I can't remember off the top of my head, but I probably do.
Sure. I just want to go out on a limb because JJ Blake has become a really influential figure in Texas wrestling, one of the head
Oh,
trainers
awesome.
here at Premier Wrestling Federation, former reality of wrestling superstar. And
Now you're gonna
I'm
make me
actually
Google.
JJ Blake.
Yeah, now you're gonna make me Google, because I'm gonna like, now it's gonna bother me. But go
Yeah,
on. So he's very influential.
yes, he went by Blake Broadway in VCW. I believe he was also tag team champions over there. But I actually begin my training with him next week. He is a head trainer here in Premier Wrestling Federation. That's my first week of wrestling with him. So I was just going out on a limb to see if you knew him.
He does look familiar. Was he in the military by chance?
He was.
I might have wrestled him,
Oh my god.
because I I could be wrong. I don't know if this is the same person. I wrestled, because he does look very familiar. I wrestled somebody in VCW. who looks like this gentleman.
Yeah.
And I remember after the match was over, he had said like it was his first match in a long time because he was in the military. And mind
Oh
you, this
wow.
was definitely at least 10 years ago.
Yes, a long time ago.
And he had said like, yeah, I just got back from the military, so I might be a little rusty. And I remember during the match, he started running at me. He was supposed to give me a clothesline. And for those that don't know, you generally give clotheslines with the right arm. You can do it with the left, but generally most people do it with the right. So if you are lefty, you probably should give somebody a heads up just so that they are aware. Um, and just the way that he was positioned, I remember that thing happening specifically. And then I went to him. I was like, "Hey, by the way, like probably give me a heads up next time that you're left-handed." And then I remember we didn't get into an argument, but I remember, and I'm not saying that this is JJ, but what I'm saying with this story, I remember them saying like, "Well, if I'm left-handed or right-handed, what does it matter if I'm coming at you to hit you with a clothesline? It doesn't matter what side I'm on." And I'm like, "Well, it is if you started on this side." Thinking that you were going to hit me with a right arm, and then you switched over to the other way, and I went, "Oh no, I don't know what's happening now." I was like,
Yeah.
"If you were on that side the entire way, then yeah, I'd be like, oh, he's probably coming at me with the left." But I'm like, "You switched sides on me." In the meantime, I'm like, it freaked the hell out of me. But so I remember having that conversation, but I'm not sure if it was him, but he does look familiar. Interesting.
So I'll be able to ask him if like, hey, did you wrestle Kekoa in VCW?
Please do. And then, and if he says like, yeah, and he was an asshole, then yeah, you know what, fair. Because it's like sometimes I just come off the wrong way, and it's
I'm gonna
I
ask
don't mean
him
to.
like, I'm just gonna ask him. You remember anything about a left arm clothesline in VCW? Yeah. Uh, tell me, how did the Ring of Honor tryout come about? How did that opportunity present itself to you?
Um, when I say it was a Ring of Honor tryout, it was, but they were like Ring of Honor camps. So you would,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it wasn't like I was invited to
Yeah.
come try out for Ring of Honor. I mean, it was everybody. You would pay $300, and then it was a 2-day camp, and one day would be like they would split the class, and then like this half would only do promos, and then the other half would do in ring stuff, and then the next day, then they would switch.
Oh,
Just
interesting.
because there's so like there was so many people doing it, and they were taking the time to really critique and go through everybody and this and that, yada yada yada. And then at the end of the 2 days, they would line everybody up and tell you if they believed if you were TV ready or not. Um, which they told me that I was basically TV ready. They're like, we just wish there was a little bit more to you. So they're like, keep coming back, like keep coming to train with us, and
Right.
we'll work on that stuff, and then like we'll move into that direction. And I did wrestle for Ring of Honor. I did one match with Ring of Honor, and then that was around the time, again I tore my ACL, and then it was
Right.
whoop, there goes that, and then I never really went back, only because I felt like the camps were not necessarily um, like how do I want to put this, like a money grab or anything like that. Like I don't want to disrespect the sessions that I did, but I was seeing that all of my friends were getting like man, I can't think of my words today. Inconsistent advice, where
Oh,
they would line everybody up, and then because while I was injured, and then all of these other camps were happening, they were giving me this feedback like, yeah, I did the Ring of Honor camp, and then they told someone that they're not TV ready, and then I saw them I saw them wrestle for Ring of Honor like a month later, and I'm like,
yeah.
huh, that is really weird. And then they're telling my friends like, yeah, you are TV ready, and then they don't have a conversation with them after that. So it was just like, huh, like that, yeah, that's really weird. But I
Mhm.
also wanted to make sure that my new character that I was coming that I had after I came out of my ACL was ready, where they
Yes.
weren't going to be able to deny me. So I'm like, if I do another one, I want to make sure that this one is 100% ready before I present that to them. And then it was in that duration that all of these things were happening, and I'm like, I'll put that in my back pocket for now. If it ends up working, if I do it, cool. If not, like it is what it is. And then I never went and had another one.
Right. So you obviously tore your ACL, and then you had this time to reflect on the character and develop a new one for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Why the Hawaiian Warrior, and how did this come to you?
So Actually, when I first came back from my ACL injury, I was the Warrior King, King Kekoa. The reason for that was because in Hawaii, there's a legend, historical figure named King Kamehameha. So King Kamehameha is essentially a god in Hawaii. He's got his own statue, he's got schools, he's got everything. He's the one that actually united the Hawaiian Islands together because they were all separated. So that's why he's so highly praised and like this, again, this big historical figure. So when I was researching about him, because I wanted to be a heel because I had been a babyface for 9 years, so I wanted to come back
Right.
completely different. So when I was researching him, because I'm like, well, most kings are like are hated because they're the ruler. Anytime you watch some type of movie, the king is the asshole, and they're all trying to kill the king. So I'm like, let me research him. I'm like, maybe I can twist this. And then as I'm researching him, I read this story about right before one of the battles that he was going into. King Kamehameha took his children and they walked up to the top of a volcano, and then he threw his kids into the volcano and sacrificed them to the gods in order to like gain this power and strength in order to win the war the next day. And I went, Jesus Christ, like he killed his kids to win a war? Like that's some bad guy shit. And then I went,
Yeah.
well, that's an easy promo if I talked about my heritage and my people where we sacrificed our own flesh and blood in order to win a battle. Imagine what I'm going to do to win the heavyweight championship of this company. I'm like, that's an easy promo. And I was like, and I can talk about all these other things. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm going to do this. So then I was the Warrior King. I got this big helmet made and I got the robe made. But then the problem was there's not a lot of strong baby faces on the independents, in my opinion. And as also the opinion of promotion. So all of these promotions that I was generally babyface, everybody else is heel. So now there's too many heels, and then these promotions are like, well, we kind of need you to go back to being a babyface. We have enough heels. And I'm like, but this is what I'm trying to do. So there was really only one promotion that I was heel at, and then that promotion ended up they stopped running, for personal reasons, which is fine. But then all of a sudden I had this helmet and I had this robe and I just dropped all this money on it, and I went, now it's just sitting here. And I'm like, now what do I do? I was like, no one wants to book me as a heel. And also on top of it, it was working against me because people see the helmet and the robe and then they go, holy fuck, this guy looks cool. Like, and then even to that, one of my favorite memories is, and one of my first matches as the Warrior King, I was wrestling at the Sanctuary in Pennsylvania. And I wrestled one of my great friends. His name is Matt Saigon, who's no longer wrestling, but Saigon would wear the big, rice patty hat, as he calls it, and because he was Vietnamese. And we had this stare off, and it's still his background on his phone. He loves that picture, and I love this picture.
Yeah.
He's there with his his big rice patty hat, and I'm there with my helmet, and we're having this stare off. And I didn't know how cool it looked. I was just in the moment of like, yeah, we'll have a stare off, But everybody in the monitor in the back, when I got to the locker room, they were like, you should have heard everyone back here. They're like, it looked like fucking Mortal Kombat. Like,
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, they're like, it looked like two Mortal Kombat characters that were about to fucking kill each other. And I was like,
yes.
Oh. I was like, all right. I was like, maybe I have something here. And then, but then again, people liked me because my gear was cool. So then I was like, well, shit, now what? And then I just kind of like dumbed it down, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, because Kekoa means courageous warrior in Hawaiian. So I'm like, what if I just called myself the Hawaiian warrior and I wore all this stuff because I already paid for it? And I'm like, all right, fuck it, let's do that. And then that was it. That's how I transitioned into that.
That is so cool. The idea of that sacrifice promo, and you coming out there and then having this character who's willing to do anything to get to the top. He doesn't care who gets in his way. He'll sacrifice anyone. His friends, family, doesn't matter. That sounds so awesome to me. Like, dude, that's stuff I want to pay for.
I did so much. Like, I felt like I was going over the top to get people to hate me, to the point where when I debuted this character, I said, okay, I need to have like a female slave where like she's like my servant. So I
Okay.
had, and the very first person that did it was Renee Michelle. So she donated her time, which I very much appreciate, because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to portray this. I'm like, I need a female, and she was like, yeah, I'll help you out. So she was the
Yeah.
first, and then I started dating my wife. So I was like, hey, do you mind helping me with this character? Like, because she's her own wrestler. I was like, do you mind if it's cool with you? And she's like, yeah. So she started being my slave woman, and even on commentary, they're like, well, what's her name? I said, she doesn't have one. She doesn't deserve one. She doesn't, you know what I mean? So then on commentary, they would say it like, we've asked Kekoa like who this person is, and he has refused to comment and say that she is property and not a human.
Whoa.
So then I also had this cart made, and then I had another buddy of mine who was in training at the time. I painted the symbol, the Polynesian symbol for slave, on his back, and then I tied the big like workout rope to it, and I had him cart me out like a slave, and I just stood on the cart like this the entire way, and then during matches I would throw my wife into harm's way, and she would get hit a lot, or I would accidentally hit her, and then after the match was over, when the referees and security are like looking at her and trying to help her, I just walked to the back and I left her there. I did all of this, and then I still had fans coming to me and be like, dude, your gear is so cool, man, I love you, like, you're awesome. And I'm like, no. Like, stop it. Like,
You literally put in so much time and effort to be the greatest heel ever. Like, and this sounds like the greatest heel ever. And people are just like, man, that's such a cool outfit.
this guy's such a badass. And I'm like, no, I don't want you. What else? Like, literally, the funny thing was, the building that me and my wife were working at all the time went to the promoter and said, she has to stop getting beat up because this is supposed to be a family friendly show, and she gets hit like every single match, and they're like, we don't want that to happen anymore. So then he had to come to me and be like, dude, you need to dial it back. And I went,
Wow.
fine. I was like, well, it's not really working anyway. There's still people cheering for me for some damn reason.
I can't believe the amount of detail. You put the Polynesian symbol for slave on this man's back. Like, people might not even recognize that, but it's that level of detail though. This is like, this is so incredible. I'm like, I'm such a fan of it now.
Yeah, I mean, I can always go back to it. I think it's, to me now.
Yeah.
Not saying that people are more sensitive, but it's easier to say the wrong thing now. So I feel
Sure,
like
yeah.
if I went along those lines and I was just degrading my wife or whoever my servant would be, it would be like nuclear at this point, in my opinion. I don't know, but
yes.
we'll
Honestly,
see.
yeah, I would love to see you come and wrestle here in Texas. And honestly, there's a guy in Reality of Wrestling. His name is Savage King. He sounds very similar. He has a female servant as well. And maybe you two should face off to see who's the real king, because that would be freaking awesome.
I was supposed to actually come and wrestle for Reality of Wrestling. I want to say about 6 years ago, because I did a seminar with Booker T, and we exchanged information, and then I was in contact with him. But obviously, like, the man is super busy. So just sooner or later, like, just contact fell off, and then it never got picked back up. And I just let that boat sail. Or I'm like, maybe I'll see him in the future and we can pick it back up. But it was in the works. I almost did.
Was that seminar in Texas?
No, it was in New Jersey. It was in Atlantic City for
Interesting.
ECWA. Yeah, he came to the Showboat Hotel and did a seminar, and I still remember a lot of the things that he talked about to this day, because it resonated with me about it. Just, again, like, little things that people show you of, like, this is my flavor of ice cream, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I'm gonna take that.
Yeah.
Like, it was awesome. It was a great seminar.
Well, we have a lot of, like, the Row superstars on here. They have a lot of stories about Booker T being, like you said, his own flavor of ice cream. He really wants to build superstars. He's so focused on, like, this is what TV would like, and that's why, like, a lot of guys and gals in Row get to build on that creativity, almost like how you talked about in your first 9 years, that, like, no one got to teach you about the character, no one got to critique about the character. But in Row, it's so focused that, like, make sure you get seen as a character out there. So it's really interesting, the contrast.
Yeah, and I to even, again, to his credit, and how thankful I am, for that day. Even after the seminar, because he made an appearance on the show that night, and I remember and I still have this picture of him and I sitting next to each other. He was sitting behind this curtain, and he was just sitting in a chair. He was just watching the show, and I said, "Hey," like I pulled up a chair next to him. I said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" I'm like, "I'd love to just pick your brain as the show is going on." And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I sit down with him, and we would watch this match together. And he wasn't saying anything, and I would be watching the matches, and then like if something happened, and I'm like, "What's your opinion on this?" Or you know what I mean, like, what would you do here? Or what would you do there? Like anything that I could pick apart. And I remember something that I saw, and I was like, I forget what it was, but I know that I hate it when I saw it and it happened. And I'll still remember this. I remember looking over at Booker, and I was like, "Hey, what's your opinion?" And I didn't even get to finish my sentence because I'm to his side, so we're like this. I didn't even get to finish my sentence. I'm like, "Hey, man, what's your opinion?" And he just goes, and I'm like, "All right, that's all I needed." He's like, "Don't fucking do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, fair enough."
Sounds
that's
like
that's what I thought. So I wanted confirmation. So thanks, Book.
Hey, always nice when your opinion gets validated by a 2-time WWE Hall of Famer. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Means you probably know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it is nice when those types of things happen, because like you feel certain things, and you're like, man, like these are things that I feel like really strongly about. And then it's not until you get to somebody else, and then you ask them that, and you're like, oh, okay, like I'm not crazy. All right, good, thank you.
And speaking of, you probably know what you're talking about. You spent most of your time wrestling on the East Coast. How did you get the opportunity to be a trainer, and not only that, but train in Florida?
So the owners of House of Champions are very good friends of mine. Their names are Nick and Renee. Nick is actually Jamie Stanley in NWA.
Wow.
So I met Nick when we were in catering at WWE during the pandemic, and we just hit it off right away. And this was when I was still living in Pennsylvania at the time. And I had this thought, I'm like, man, I should really move to Florida, because I had gotten to train with essentially a who's who of the roster over at Devon Dudley School, because the PC was taken up. So, I got invited to go over there, and I got to train with everybody. I'm like, man, if I could just be around these people all the time and just get better because I'm training with them specifically, I'm like, that makes the most sense for how I'm going to be the best that I can be. So then I mentioned it to him at one point. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about moving down here. And he's like, you should. I just moved here from Michigan. And I was like, all right, fine, I will. And he goes, do it. You won't. I'm like, no, I will. And he's like, you won't. Like, he was, he's testing me. Okay. And that was in August of 2020. And by December, I had sold my house and we had already moved. So it only took me about like 4 months, for me to make it happen. But again, to get to the school, at one point, he was asking me a lot of questions about my wrestling ring, because I had purchased a ring back in like 2017, I think it was, to do rentals and to like offer companies, more things. And then I bought all of these other things that companies needed, because I wanted to be like a one-stop shop for a promoter, so they didn't have to have a music guy and a ring guy and a license guy and a stage guy. Like, I wanted all of it, so you just came to me, and it was a lot easier. And I also know I'm reliable. But anywho, so he was asking me a lot of questions about my ring, and I thought he wanted to get into the rental game with the questions that he was asking me. And then finally he goes, yeah, I'm thinking about opening up a gym. He said gym, not a school. He said gym. And I went, oh, well, that's awesome. I was like, well, I'm like, if you open up a gym, like whenever that happens, or if it happens, I said, you can use my ring. Like, don't buy a ring. And he's like, are you sure? And I said, yeah. I was like, dude, you're my buddy. You've done so much for me and my family, which, I could go on and on about how amazing of people Nick and Renee are. Mm-hmm. I'm like, it's the least I could do. I'm like, my ring sits in a trailer if it's not being rented. And I'm like, I just got here. I only really rent to one company. So I'm like, it's not being used. Like, use it. So he was like, yeah, man, I really appreciate that. And then, again, when someone says this like pipe dream, you just go like, yeah, it's a pipe dream. Well, he made it a reality. And all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's like, hey, we're looking at businesses. Like, we're trying to find a home for this gym. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, this is going to be a thing. And then out of nowhere, he's like, hey, we're signing the paperwork. I'm like, fuck. I was like, oh, it's really happening. Like, oh, shit. And then he starts talking to me about like, yeah, so this is what we're going to do at the school. I was like, what school? He was like, we're gonna start a wrestling school. And I was like, oh, I thought you were gonna do a gym. He was like, no, why would I ask about the ring? I'm like, I thought you just wanted the ring in the gym. I was like, shit, all right, you're starting a school, good for you. I was like, well, now I have a place to train, you know, when I want to, because you're using my ring. So I was fortunate for that. And then when it was getting close, like they were signing the paperwork and they were getting ready to move in, I was like, so who do you have as your trainer? And they're like, I think we're going to use this guy. And I went, awesome, great choice. Like, you know, I was not asking as in like, I want you to hire me. It was like, I'm invested into my friend. Like, who are you going to get? And I also very much understand in the business of professional wrestling, the first advice that most people give you is go to a reputable school. Go to somebody that's going to be able to teach you the right way. That happens to be someone from a name value, someone that has had a career in WWE or WCW or so on and forth, you know, someone that's had a career and has had success, and then is like, okay, I'm done wrestling. Like now I'm going to train people. So on top of it, I'm like, it can't be me. You know, I've never been signed. I completely understand that. But then one day he, you know, the person that he was going to hire as the head trainer, he said, you know, hey, like, I don't think it's going to work out. Like, they were supposed to move over in this direction. Now they're not. So it might be a little bit too far from them. On top of it, I don't think they're going to be as involved with the business as I think that they would be, or we would like them to be. And I went, oh, man, that sucks. And then he goes, I want to offer you the position. And I went, why? Because he goes, like, dude, man, like, in the times that Nick and I have worked together, and we've had matches together, practice matches, nothing at a show by any means, but he goes, you were the first one to point out things that like I didn't notice, or he was like, I value your opinion. He's like, you're very, you know, you speak well when you're teaching and you make people understand. He's like, you just seem like you would be an awesome coach. And he's like, and you already have experience, because I did have a school for a brief period in Pennsylvania. So and I also felt that too, because at one point he was asking me a lot about like, well, how did you do with this? Or how did you do with that? How did you handle new students? And it almost felt like an interview, right. And I didn't know it. I was just like, yeah, so this is what I did. This is what my thought process was. So, and I said, hey, are you really sure? Because again, I know, like, yes, I have a lot of experience, and I think I can, you know, I'm confident in guiding people, but I'm like, again, this is your business at the end of the day. Like, this is your money that you're invested. I'm just a hired help. I'm like, if you want to put your stamp on me, like, you know, I'm gonna do the best that I can. And that's how I became the trainer. You know, he said, no, you're my guy. And I very much appreciate it. And, you know, I approached his school the same way that I approached it when I opened up my own school, because I didn't want to open up a school in Pennsylvania. A gym owner asked me if I could do it because he wanted to separate his gym from other gyms in the area to compete with the Planet Fitnesses and the, you know, Orange Fitness, whatever else was up there. But I've gone to a lot of different wrestling schools throughout my career. I've seen a lot of different trainers in my career. I've seen how awful a lot of wrestling schools and a lot of trainers are. And they can't do or show or say like what I feel is the best way to set someone up for success, whether it's your flavor of ice cream or not. And I said, well, I know I can do better than that, and they have a school. So I am just very confident in the basics. I'm very confident in the fundamentals. So I said, I think I can do this, and I feel like I'm doing all right so far. I'm happy with my progress so far.
Yeah, it seems really awesome. House of Champions has this really professional looking style to it. I'm sure like when a lot of people look up for wrestling schools in the area, there could be a lot of shady options, as you know. So ones that don't look super legit, ones that won't give you a free class, you know, because they just want to rope you in. But House of Champions has this really professional look. They obviously have great trainers. Y'all have the social media backing. So House of Champions only seems to be on the rise. That's really cool.
Yeah, from first glance, like when you look at, you know, when you look at what we offer, in comparison to other schools. And again, for anybody that's ever done their research, or if you haven't, most wrestling schools are a ring in a very small space, and like that's it. Like, you know, they might have a floor, it might be outside, like, you know, who the heck knows. um, there's some wrestling schools that have their ring outside and then they put a tarp over it. And again, I'm not taking away from the value that you can learn from different people and just because of the atmosphere. Yeah, I understand all that. I'm not saying that you can't learn. Heck,
Right.
if anybody watches the Eddie Guerrero documentary, he learned a lot of the stuff in his backyard from his family. But when you look at our facility, you see the level of expectation that we feel that we carry because we are a performance center. When you look at what we have, a full weight room, an infrared sauna, a 20 by 20 wrestling ring, which is nobody else really has a 20 by 20, which for anybody that's listening, that's what WWE and AEW uses. That's their show like size. Every other ring is either a 16 or an 18-foot ring. So you're really training in the best ring. Like it's just a different beast.
Definitely.
Again, the infrared sauna, that we have a cold plunge. Like nobody has a cold plunge.
Yeah.
Like especially in Florida, like there's no regular gyms that have a cold plunge.
Yeah.
We focus on recovery. We have marketing classes, we have promo classes, we have improv classes, we have film study classes. Like we focus a complete full circle spectrum of everything that we feel that you need to focus on in order to be the best professional wrestler and best entertainer that you can be. It's not just come in, learn the moves, all right, go figure it out. You're not a turnstile at House of Champions. If you are coming to House of Champions, you're telling us that this is what you want to do and you want to put your best foot forward and you want to be the best that you can absolutely be. All right, we're going to make sure that we get you there. And even on top of all of those other things that I listed, literally what I did all day today was I sat on Zoom because we had our students, some virtual, some in person. We have office hours where we set aside time on our calendar where we sit down and we have a 1 hour meeting with them at no charge to go over whatever you want to talk about. Do you want to talk about diet? You want to talk about nutrition, workout? You want to talk about promos? You want to talk about character? You want to talk about your in-ring stuff? You want to talk about personal stuff? Whatever the hell you want. Like, we are devoted to everyone that comes in that door and puts on the shirt that says that they want to be part of the House of Champion. They want to be a member. There's so many aspects that we strive for in our facility that no other school even comes close to, no other school even touches. And that's why we're really trying to set ourselves apart and really be a standard for the future of professional wrestling as what a wrestling school should be.
Yeah, that's insane. It already sounds like House of Champions is one of the best facilities, one of the best training gyms you could go to in the nation. That is awesome. And I congratulate you on being the head trainer there as well and holding up that standard. And since moving to Florida, you must have immersed yourself in the local indie culture there, the indie wrestling scene there. Most of our listeners are in Texas. If there was one wrestler from indie wrestling in Florida that you could have someone look at in Texas, who would that be? Who would you say, "Hey, you got to watch this guy"? Other than yourself, of course.
No, I'd never say me. That's tough because there are a lot of people that come and go, and there's a lot of, and the other problem too is there's a lot of people that move to Florida, but they're not Florida wrestlers because they're so busy elsewhere. And then I almost forget, like, oh yeah, you are from Florida. Like,
Yeah,
does that make sense? Like,
I get it.
Again, it's different in Texas because you know, again, your state is so big, and Florida is very similar to that too. Like, from Orlando to Atlanta is an 8-hour drive, which is normal for wrestlers, but some wrestlers just don't want to drive that far. So like when you look at Florida wrestlers, that's why you tend to see the same wrestlers on all of these different promotions because it's such a big state.
Yeah.
That's why people in Miami, like from Orlando to Miami is a 4-hour drive, 4 or 5 hour drive. So then you think about from Miami to the top of Florida is, you know, a 7-8 hour drive at least. So again, we are very similar, but there is somebody, in my opinion, that is a phenomenal wrestler, and I know firsthand because I get to train with this guy, and I'm very fortunate that I get to lock up with him, and you know, he's very passionate about wrestling, as passionate as I am. He tries to think about, you know, what is going to be successful. His name is Jake Sterling, and I will add to that, with his his partners, which is he goes by Kai Price. His name is Khalil and Cameron Fox. Um, so Cam, Khalil, and Jake, they call themselves the New Foundation because they all train at the dungeon, as do I, and they've really adapted, the heart family, the dungeon aspect of training, and they're trying to again be that new wave. Um, Jake is the leader of the group because he's the most experienced between the three, and that's why I say him off the top of my head. But Khalil is going to be great. Cam's going to be great. The three of them are going to be a threat in general. But Jake, I feel like he's like 6'3", I think 6'2" or 6'3". Like he's tall.
Yeah.
And he can springboard, like he can do things, and he can move around a ring that most guys his size can't do. So I think he's going to be very dangerous in the future. So I can only hope that that it pays off for him, and I'm sure that it will.
That's all. Jake Sterling. If you're in Texas, you never heard of Jake Sterling, go check him out right now. And Kekoa, due to time constraints, we are gonna have to start concluding here. But I want to give you the opportunity to tell the fans at home anything you'd like. You have the floor right now. What's a message you have for the people?
So the thing that I always say at the end of these types of things is because I generally say the same thing because I've had my fair share of near-death experiences in my life. I know that tomorrow is never promised. Our next moment is never promised. We never know when the last time we speak to somebody is. So for anybody that's listening to this, whether you bought a t-shirt, a photo, or you watched one of my matches, or you liked a post, or you watched my TikToks, or you followed me on there, like whatever type of support you've ever given me, I very much appreciate. If this is the first time that you're ever listening to me and you're like, hey, this guy seems pretty cool and I'm going to go follow him now, I very much appreciate it. Like, I'm just appreciative of everything that I've absolutely been able to do. I feel like, when my kids get a little bit older and they understand the words that I'm saying, that I have so many stories to tell them and my grandkids when I'm old. I'm just very fortunate and blessed, and even to do these types of things where some people, think that I'm worthy enough to be like, hey, I want to interview that guy. So I very much appreciate it. I don't take these things for granted. So just thank you. And again, for anybody that's watching it and wants to follow along, it's pretty easy to find me. There's not many Kekoas. There's only one other Kekoa in the wrestling world, and we get mistaken for a lot. That's Noah Kekoa, who used to be signed to NXT. We always get tagged. Yeah, we always get tagged in each other's like shit, and then like I'll see a poster, and I'm like, I'm not booked on this show, and then I look, and I'm like, oh, that's why I'm tagged, and then I go, wrong oos, like you got the wrong oos. So it's a running joke between us now.
Awesome.
But it's very easy to find me. I'm at Kekoa Pro for pretty much all of my social media platforms, other than TikTok because some idiot took Kekoa Pro and they don't even use TikTok, so it's just sitting there. But I'm at Kekoa HW on TikTok. You could also find my wrestling school if you're interested in coming to check us out again. For even if you're a beginner or advanced or you have no experience, you get a free first class to come check out our facility and see if we're a great fit for you. We are at www.thehawk, HOC, obviously for House of Champions, thehawkpro.com, which carries over into all social medias, Instagram and TikTok as well. So we're very easy to find. So again, thank you. Thank you as well for having me on the show, and thank you for anybody that's listening.
Of course, make sure to check out Kekoa on all social media and check out House of Champions as well. Their links will be in the description of this episode. I want to thank Kekoa once again for joining us. It was an immense pleasure to be able to talk to you and hear your stories, and I greatly appreciate that. And as always, to all the fans at home, I gotta tell you, stay restless.